Joining us to discuss now is David Wurmser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former Senior Advisor to U.S. Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and Strategic Affairs. So good to have you here, as always, of course. And a London-based news outlet, Iran International, has concluded that 12,000 protesters have been killed. But today in the Oval Office, President Trump said he's gotten word that Iran will not carry out the execution of protesters, that the killing of the protesters has stopped. What are your thoughts on what this means?
Well, it's difficult to gauge really what it means because, one, we're hearing that there are still fighting and protests going on. We know there are certain cities, especially in the Kurdish areas, maybe those areas that are not under the government's control. And you can imagine the government will now attack those. And the executions, they've been executing a lot of people throughout the year, even before these demonstrations, 2,000 people this year, or in 2025, sorry. So I'm dubious that the government in Iran can be trusted with any of this. They're going to kill people. They have to survive, and they will do it. So I think the next few days will tell whether this is a deception, and this may be a deception by President Trump on the eve of an attack, to sort of lull the Iranians or others into a sense of complacency. And he has been very good at deceiving in that way, the strategic deception. But on the other hand, it is also calling if Iran is promising this, it's sort of calling their bluff. And it'd be very difficult for the Iranian regime not to continue its killing and still survive, because the Iranian people will take to the streets. Because they want this government brought down. They don't want a deal. They want the government gone.
Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, do you think a U.S. operation in Iran is imminent? Is it close or far away?
The answer to that is yes. It could be hours away, and there are some indications that things are underway, whether it's refueling activities, certain planes in the sky that you would expect to see, behaviors going on by American forces, by Israelis, Israeli government orders to their population, all indicate that we're hours perhaps away from an attack. But at the same time, the statements the president is saying suggest he thinks that he scared the Iranians enough to stand down. And that they can then move towards some sort of a deal. Again, it's impossible to know right now if this is an elaborate deception as cover for the attack that's already underway, or whether we have a last-minute deal that was cooked behind the scenes. One thing I would note is the president said 2 days ago that he had cut off all ties, negotiating ties through third parties or directly with the Iranians. So it's hard to know what deal could have been made, but again, it's impossible to know at this point.
Okay, so whether this is deception or not, reports are saying 12,000 people have been killed. I mean, if the U.S. does not commit to its action, I mean, it didn't make a commitment, but if it doesn't strike, does that reflect poorly on the U.S.?
Well, that's a great question. Absolutely, it would be seen as buckling to Qatari, Turkish, and Saudi Arabian pressure. That they didn't want these strikes. They said America can't use their airspace. Qatar said they cannot use the CENTCOM main base in Doha, et cetera. And it would be seen that weakness, because Doha would be seen to control Washington. And that's the story that will come out. The Iranian people will see it as weakness because the Iranian people, again, they're not after a deal or reform of the government's behavior. They see this as a once-in-a-lifetime chance to bring down their regime. And they will be horribly frustrated and upset that they will have had the rug pulled out from under them. And they will see it as weakness. The only explanation for that in their mind will be weakness. The Israelis will feel frustrated if it's indeed a deal because there are other issues. One, it's the people. The Israelis are very much for having some sort of a regime collapse, because it's the only real solution for the Israelis to the nuclear problem, the missile problem, and so forth. But if there's no regime collapse, Israel would have to now strike the missile program, because the Iranians are hitting Israel's red lines again and rebuilding. And that puts Israel, if there's a deal, that puts Israel in a very difficult position to do that. So again, the Iranian people, if it's real and there is a deal, the Iranian people and the Israelis are very nervous about this. The Saudis, the Qataris, and the Turks are deeply opposed to regime instability in Iran and encouraging it in an American strike. So they would be ecstatic.
So how do you think our adversaries or countries that are not so friendly with the U.S. will be looking at this? For example, if the U.S. does not commit to strikes in Iran, how might the Chinese regime, for example, be viewing these events as they play out?
No, that is another excellent question. The Chinese regime is a very important factor here. Whenever you have let's say the American struck, or there was the revolution succeeds on its own. Anywhere you see a major country, and Iran is a major country to which Iran pays a lot of attention, would have a freedom revolution, a revolution that brings freedom to a country from a dictatorship or a totalitarian ideological regime like Iran or China. It will affect countries like Cuba and, of course, the big one, China. We know Tiananmen happened right after the Russians collapsed. The idea of freedom is very infectious, and that's what's worrying the that's what's worrying the Chinese heavily, is the precedent that if Iran liberates itself, what that would mean for China. So obviously the Chinese would be quite relieved if a crisis were averted here. They will cast it in terms of, they want peace, and if they're relieved that peace broke out and diplomacy won. But the truth is they will be relieved that the pressure on freedom will dissipate, will decline if there's no true revolution in Iran that brings about freedom.
Okay, so David, I want to squeeze in one final question here on the peace deal, the Phase 2 peace deal for Gaza. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said the next part of the plan for Gaza will see the demilitarization of Hamas and the start of reconstruction efforts. But details remain hazy at this point on some of the specifics, like who will comprise Gaza's interim government. How do you see this moving ahead?
Well, we can say that because there's the original deal, but Hamas says it never agreed to the terms of Phase 2, and it will not disarm. And their sponsors, Turkey and Qatar, once again, do not want them to disarm at this point, and are trying to convince the United States to allow them to exist as a weak rump government in the remainder of Gaza. So there's a real problem here. There's no mechanism to disarm Hamas voluntarily, or diplomatically, or through an international force. All of the countries that are talked about as potentially joining will not fight to disarm Hamas. So the only force on the ground that can do it is Israel, and that means the war resumes and the ceasefire ends. And the Israelis are getting nervous because yesterday there were 2 missiles shot at Israel from Gaza, and it's a countdown to another October 7th if Hamas survives. So what Steve Witkoff did is he reiterated what Israel, America, and the interlocutors committed to under Phase 2, but I don't believe there's any agreement on Hamas's side to go to Phase 2. And without that, I think that there's too much instability, and there's still a need for Israel to go to war to finish it. So I think it's a very difficult situation. I think he's trying his best to keep the lid on things, but the lid is really rattling hard. The pressure underneath is building, and it can blow off quite easily very soon.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to remember, that Hamas has not necessarily agreed to the terms of Phase 2. It's always great to hear your insight, David. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.